Hi, boys and girls. It's Miss Carpenter. I wanted to go over a lesson 11 in your language arts handbook, which is on page 484 and 485 in the back of your Reading I Ready book. Okay, so if you don't have that, be getting it really quick before we start our lesson. All right, today we're going to be doing language for 2B, which says I can use commas and quotation marks to mark direct speech and quotation marks, quotations from a text. Okay, so we'll get started on our lesson. Let's look at our introduction. It says using a direct quotation or a person's exact words can help make your writing come alive. You can write the exact words of a character in a story, or you can write what someone in real life has said or written. Use quotation marks. Now, you see what they are here. Now, they're used in pairs. Quotation marks are used in pairs, so make sure you always use two sets of them before and after the exact words of a speaker or an author. Okay, and so here's some of our rules that we need to remember. Let's look at the first one. A direct quotation can come at the beginning of a sentence. That means the speaker's words are in the front, and the tag, I call this the tag, it's kind of like getting a gift. You have a tag to say who's it to and who it's from. Okay, so these are someone's exact words. I can't wait to see the Washington Monument, said Alina. Okay, we do not put said Alina in quotation marks because we don't say those. Now, when teachers do read stories, a lot of times we are reading to you, we'll say said so and things like that so you'll know who's speaking. But when you're reading on your own, generally you do not say said Alina or said Fred or whatever. Okay, the second rule says a direct quotation can also come at the end of a sentence. Use a comma to separate the beginning of the sentence from the quotation. Let's look at this example. Arthur Rachel White wrote, see that comma right there? This one up here didn't have the comma because the tag was at the end. But when we put our tag at the front, we separate it with a comma. All right, and then we open our quotes. The Washington Monument is one of the most popular tourist attractions in the United States. And see, then we put a period and we close our quotes. Remember, our quotation marks are used in pairs. Okay, now our last little bit of information says use quotation marks only when you are showing a person's exact words, not when you're explaining what the person said. So if you're paraphrasing what the person said, you do not have to use quotes. But if you're stating directly, like in newspaper articles, a lot of times they'll have interviewed someone. They'll put those words in exact quotes so you'll know that that person, maybe the police chief or a doctor, said those exact things. Whereas if they're not in quotation marks, you know that that reporter paraphrased or put it, or what we say, put into your own words before they printed that. And see that here's the difference in them. Nathan said, here's our tag at the front, I look forward to the trip to Washington. And we closed our quotes. But this next example, it said Nathan said that he looks forward to the trip to Washington. See up here, this went from first person to third person. I look forward to the trip. Nathan is saying these exact words. We're down here. We're just saying what Nathan is looking forward to. Now, I have a couple examples that we're going to go over before we do our book, okay? So let's look at our first two examples. We have two examples. We have example number 1 and example number 2. All right, so let's look at example number 1. Marta cried, that monument is huge. Now, first of all, we need to figure out who is saying this and what are they saying. Okay? Who is saying this and what are they saying? So let's look at sentence number 1. Who is saying this? You're exactly right. Marta is. And how is she saying it? She's crying it. She's shouting it. Okay? That monument is huge. So this is what our tag is. This is who's saying it. Okay? Now, when our tag is at the front, we remember from rule number 1 that, or excuse me, rule number 2, that when our tag is at the front, we separate it with a comma. So we need to put a comma right there behind Marta cried. Now, what did Marta cry? You're exactly right. That monument is huge. Now remember, quotation marks. We put them in front of the first word that she said, and we use them in pairs, and we're going to use them after the punctuation mark at the end. Huge mistake we teachers see a lot. A lot of times we see people, students who put the quotation marks inside. That is incorrect. Think of quotation marks like a big hug. And when you give somebody a hug, you wrap up that person, grandma, mom, whoever it is you're giving a hug to, you wrap them up completely. You don't leave somebody out over here, okay? So you want to make sure and put your quotation marks after the ending punctuation mark, okay? Also, I've heard before somebody call it a fence, and you want to fence in all the words that are being said. Well, think of your quotation marks as your fence, and you don't want a word to get out. It doesn't matter that the tag is on the outside because that's just saying who said it and how they said it, okay? Which a lot of times this word right here will help you give liveliness to your sentence. Did they shout it? Did they scream it? Did they just say it? All right. And in this case, she cried it. So that tells us how she said it. So when we repeated that, we would be able to say it like that. Now, let's go down here to example 2. All right. Here, we have another sentence that says, can we explore inside the building? Asked Juan. Now, again, before we start adding anything in, we need to figure out who said it and what did they say. Okay? And in this case, Juan asked it. Okay? He's asking a question. Okay? So we know if he asks something, what are we going to need inside this sentence? Okay? You're exactly right. We're going to need a question mark, and we're going to put it behind his last word, not at the behind Juan. That's a common mistake. We're not putting that apart. Okay? Remember, think of this as a fence. He's not going to say, can we explore inside the building? Ask Juan. Okay? He's going to ask, can we explore inside the building? Okay? So we don't put this inside of our question mark. Okay? Now, what did he say? Can we explore inside the building? So we're going to put quotation marks in front of can. Now, quotation marks come in pairs. Where does our second set of quotation marks going to go? Is it going to go behind the question mark, or is it going to go back here behind one? Now, if you said behind the question mark, you are correct. In this case, we would put the behind the question mark. Now, do we need a comma in this sentence? This sentence up here in the first one, we needed a comma. And in this case, no. But we do need a period behind one because we are ending the sentence. Okay? So now, there's a couple examples before we have our book lesson. So right now, let's go to our guided practice. Now, before we get started, let's read those directions. It says, add the correct punctuation mark where it is needed in each sentence. Now, let's go over here and read this hint. I love hints. It says, be sure the end punctuation after a speaker's words is inside the quotation marks. That's exactly what I said a few minutes ago. For example, Lynn asked, where have you been? See, the quotation marks are after the question mark. Here's another one down here. I've been right here, I shouted. The quotation marks are after the words, not the tag. Remember, we do not put the tag inside of quotation marks. All right, now, let's look at question number 1 or sentence number 1. I'm almost ready to go, exclaimed Chris. Now, let's look at this sentence. Let's analyze it. What is it missing? All right, we find our tag here. We see that it has a period. We see that they ended his words, an exclamation mark. What this sentence is missing is our quotation marks. We need to put them in front of I'm, and then our second set needs to go after the exclamation mark, okay? After the exclamation mark. All right, let's go to sentence number 2. Mr. Mendez said, before we go, we need to learn about the Washington Monument. Okay, now find out who said it and how did they say it and what did they say. And in this case, Mr. Mendez said it. All right, now our tag is at the front. And if you go back up to the second rule up there, it says use a comma to separate the beginning of a sentence from the quotation mark. We need to put a comma behind that word said. Okay, Mr. Mendez said. Now, are we going to put that in quotation marks? No, because that's the tag. Remember, the tag does not go in quotation marks. So we put a comma before, quotation marks before, and then we're going to put our second set of quotation marks behind the period. Remember, the ending punctuation goes inside the quotation marks, not outside. All right, number 3. Why did they build the monument? Alva asked. Okay, now, Alva asked, that's our tag. Okay, we have our question mark there, which tells us that how Alva said it. So what we're going to need to add in is, since these are Alva's exact words, we need some quotation marks. Now, we know we need them at the beginning. Okay, now where do we need our other second set? Do we need them behind the question mark, or do we need them behind the period? If you said behind the question mark, you are correct, because remember, we do not put our tag inside our quotation marks. All right, number 4. Chris replied, it was built to honor George Washington. Okay, in this case, our tag is at the front. Chris answered this question. Okay, so Chris replied. So our tag is at the front, so we need to add a comma behind replied to separate it from the rest of the sentence. Now, what did he exactly reply? What were his exact words? It was built to honor George Washington. So we need to put quotation marks in front of it. And are we going to put quotation marks in front of the period, or are we going to put them after the period? If you said after the period, you are correct. Okay? And then our last sentence, number 5. The monument is a symbol of his leadership, wrote Arthur Rachel White. All right. Now, who said it and how did they say it? She wrote Arthur Rachel White. So that is our tag. Okay. That's our tag. What did she say? The monument is a symbol of leadership. So we need to put quotation marks in front of the and after the word leadership. Now, we still need one more punctuation mark, okay? Since this tag, all right, wrote Arthur Rachel White at the end of the sentence, we need to put a comma right behind leadership. We would not put a period here because you have a period here. You can't use 2 periods in a sentence, but you can use an exclamation point in a period. You can use a question mark and a period, but you cannot use a period and a period. So that's something you need to remember when you're doing those. All right, now, one last section before we move on. You had sentences 1 through 4, and it says, for numbers 1 through 4, which sentence in each group uses the correct punctuation mark. Now, what I would like for you to do is I would like for you to stop your video for just a few minutes, and I would like for you to work questions 1 through 4 and find the one that uses the correct punctuation mark, and then come back and start this video here in just a couple of minutes, and I'm going to go over the correct answers with you. All right, now that you have answered your problems, your questions, and you found your sentences, let's look at the ones that are written correctly. Let's look at number 1. All right, if you said D in this sentence, you are correct, because you will see quotation marks at the front, exclamation point, and quotation marks behind that exclamation point, and we had a period at the end. Yes, we can use an exclamation mark and a period together. All right, question number 2, sentence number 2. The tour guide said the monument is more than 555 feet tall. If you said choice A, you are correct. Okay, Here in our case, the tag is at the front, so we needed a comma here. Okay, then we opened our quotes, and then we wrote our direct quote, and then we put our period, and then our quotation marks are at the end. Like down here, they didn't even on choice C, they didn't even use quotation marks. Okay, all right. Number three, Arthur Carter Bailey wrote, "More than 500,000 visitors go to the top of the monument in most years." And this sentence, if you chose B, you were correct. We had our tag again at the front. We put our comma behind it. We opened our quotes. We wrote our direct quote, exactly what Carter Bailey wrote. And then we put our period. And then our quotation marks are behind the punctuation mark. Remember, that is a huge mistake that we teachers see. So many kids want to put those quotation marks inside the punctuation mark, and it should go at the very end of the quote. All right, and then number four, the monument is temporarily closed for repairs, the officer said. Now, in this case, C was your correct answer. Now, in this case, the tag was at the end. Okay, so we had put our quotes at the beginning, and in this case, he just said it. Okay, so we would have just needed a period here, but remember, we can't use a period and a period, so we place a comma there. Okay, now, boys and girls, if you're still struggling with about punctuating direct quotations marks, if you will go and look at that helpful links list that the teachers and all the different teachers sent you, uh, or if you'll go to our page, it is very helpful, and we'll go over all of these lessons. Okay, and there's tons of videos that we found that will help you with this. And if you have any more questions, also talk to your teacher. They're here for you, and they will be glad to answer any question that you have. All right, guys, I enjoyed being with you today. I'll be back later in the week for lesson 12.